feelings, loves, anything like that.
Yeah,
It's your floor.
great. So, hi everyone. Kyle Mason here, Rutland County Forester. I've been with the state of Vermont since I was 17, actually. I started cleaning toilets in state parks while I was in high school, and kind of discovered forestry while working in parks, and went to school and worked as a seasonal forester for a little while. And then I was the NRCS forester for a little while, dealing with wildlife habitat on private lands. And then I was the Bennington County Forester for a while, and now I'm in my home county of Rutland, and very happy to be here. So for those of you that don't know what a county forester is, we're state foresters that work with the public. So we're kind of the forest and parks face to the public entity out there, which is, 80% of the forest land in the state is owned by private landowners. So it's a pretty important section of what we do. A big part of my job is administering the current use program. So it's a tax incentive program that gives landowners tax breaks in exchange for managing their forests sustainably and producing a timber product that helps our economy and everyone in the state. But when I'm not doing that, I'm doing public outreach like this, talking to folks, doing walks in the woods. I also manage some town forests and sit on a few committees. I'm on the tree farm committee. Yeah, so that's me. So I think if there's any questions, I'd like to start there. If not, I can just gab about all sorts of things. So.
I'm going to tell you to start gabbing. No one's popped in a question, although they can turn their mic on and ask a question if they like. Why don't you start off with a little bit what's going on outside right now? If people want to get out into their woods, what can they be looking for or doing right now since we can't really be together?
Yeah, this is actually one of my favorite times to be out in the woods. It's great because a couple things. You can, without the leaves out there, you can really see long distances. So if you're trying to plan for activities you want to do, now's a great time because you can really just see more than otherwise. And winter tends to keep people inside, and with this whole epidemic thing happening, I know I have cabin fever, so this is by far my favorite time of the year to get out there. And sugaring season is in full swing still. I have a very, very small hobby-sized operation that I am just finishing up with now. So sugaring is good until the buds pop out. So as soon as the buds open is when the season ends, and that's happening any day now. So we're coming to an end. Any questions yet, or do you want me to keep blabbing? No? Okay. So coming up right away, the first species that tend to pop their bud are all our invasive species, and that's coming up probably in the next week or 2 weeks. And this is a great time if you're stuck at home to be trying to eliminate your invasive species. Like I said, their buds tend to pop first, so they're really easy to see. And there's a website called vtinvasives.org. So if you're not completely familiar with how to identify, honeysuckle or barberry or some of our invasives, that's a fantastic resource. It's got great pictures. And I would highly recommend making sure you know it's an invasive before you pull it. I was with a landowner one time that seemed to think every bush on her property was invasive, and she was pulling natives left and right. So make sure you know what it is before you pull it. And the other thing with this time of year right now is that because the kind of frost has stirred the soil up a little bit from the winter, things are the easiest to pull out of the ground now than they are. So this is a great time to be thinking about doing some invasive work on your property. Not only are they easy to see and spot because the buds are going to be the first ones out, but they're easiest to pull. And when you do that, you want to make sure you don't just throw it on the ground. These plants are really good at what's called layering, so sending roots out of regular branches and stuff and reestablishing themselves. So the trick is to get the roots to dry out. So what I like to do when I pull them is I like to hang them in a tree that's nearby with their roots sticking straight up in the air, and that helps dry them out and kills them. The only species I wouldn't do that to is garlic mustard, because it won't care if you do that. It'll still develop a seed and throw it out and be happy that it had a higher point to throw its seed out. So any species but garlic mustard, pull it and hang up. We do have any questions yet, Lisa?
We do. So first off, I have a question. What should I be doing my garlic mustard then? And someone else wanted to know about, identifying, like tagging their invasives, and then how to tell the difference between native honeysuckle and the invasive honeysuckle.
Oh, okay. So let's start with the garlic mustard one. So there's a couple of strategies you can do. I think the best one is just to carry a trash bag with you. And you want to just put it in a trash bag and close it up and stick that in a real sunny spot and let it basically bake and roast in the black trash bag is the best thing to do for that. Don't cut them. When I was the park ranger at Emerald Lake, we had a really bad garlic mustard problem there, and we were trying to pull them, but we weren't doing it quick enough, and it was about to go to seed, and so I sent one of my staff members out there to basically weed whack it. My thought was I would knock the plant down and stop it from going to seed at least, but the plant came back with a vengeance, and each plant that we weed whacked put out about 4 times more seed than it would have had we just left it alone. So although it's kind of a herbaceous plant, weed whacking isn't a good option. They pull really easy out of the ground, so that's the way to do it. And they're a biannual, so the ones that are going to seed will be kind of tall, maybe 1.5 to 1 foot in height. So they're pretty small, and that seed that falls out of them will fall the end of July. So you have a little bit of time to try to grab them before that happens. But yeah, don't weed whack, put in a plastic trash bag. And identifying the difference between invasive honeysuckle and native honeysuckle. If it's a big, like 6 foot tall bush, you can pretty much be guaranteed that it's an invasive species. The native honeysuckle is pretty rare, and it's tends to be more of like a berry bush size as opposed to like a lilac bush size. And the other thing you can do is you can look at the pith. So what I mean by that is if you were to take a branch from it and you were to break it, the invasive honeysuckle will have a hollow pith, so it'll look like a straw when you break and look into it, where the native honeysuckle does not. It'll have a lot more material inside the pith. But vtinvasives.org as well. Make sure you're not pulling native honeysuckle. They're pretty rare, yeah. Great.
All right, another listener wants to know, I feel like this little radio host, I love it. What, in your opinion, is the biggest threats to the health of our forests here in Vermont or Rutland County?
I actually think it's native invasive plants. Development is certainly an issue, especially with parcelization and kind of, poking holes in our forests. Insects and, like the emerald ash borer is certainly a threat, but that tends to affect a single species, and everyone seems to know about it, and it's in a time frame that humans are used to. We can see the effects of the insect. Invasive plants, though, they creep up on you. They increase exponentially. Actually, if you look at their population growth, it's not far from what the coronavirus is currently doing, where it's like it's there, and then all of a sudden it's everywhere. And we tend to, the other thing is we tend to, as humans, I think most of us look out in the forest and we see invasive plants and we see green. It looks like plants. So I think a a lot of us kind of think that that they're not as big of a problem as they are. And unlike an insect that will, you know, eliminate a species, these are habitat killers. You know, they basically take over an entire forest. You know, once they establish themselves in the understory and start choking out the natives from being able to regenerate, you know, once those trees that are above them that may take 200-300 years to die there's no replacement for them, and you end up with just a monoculture of invasive species. And, you know, besides the fact that there aren't, you know, trees for us to enjoy anymore, it's just invasives. If you think about wildlife habitat and biodiversity in particular, a species like a red oak that's native can have, you know, over 200 different types of species of caterpillars feeding on them. And those caterpillars then feed the birds and, you know, and start the whole food chain. Do you know how many insects or caterpillars feed on like Japanese barberry in this area? 0. So it's just a choke out of our natural world, and it's things that people don't tend to take as seriously as I think they really need to. And like I said, that that chart of how their populations increase, you want to be hitting it here before it does that. And so it looks like it's not a problem, and so you add it to the bottom of your to-do list when you're managing your property, and then next thing you know, it's too late.
All right, so a few more on invasives. Someone wants to know what your thoughts on flame weeding barberry is versus other methods, and you might want to explain flame weeding before you explain your thoughts on the use of it for those that may not be familiar with it. And then another question related to the removal of mature invasives like the Norway maple. Should native plantings and ground cover invasive removal be done before cutting or after?
Boy, okay, that's a lot. So if I forget some of that, remind me. Let's start with the flame. Well, first off, that just seems like a really fun way to kill invasives. I've never done it. I've seen videos and I've seen one demonstration of it and would love to try it. It looked like a ton of fun. But my understanding of that is, I think like with like a honeysuckle or a barberry or something, and I'm no expert on this particular method, I need to make that clear. I believe it kills by essentially girdling the plant, and so I think the root system is still alive when you do that. So I don't know this for sure, but I would go to vtinvasives.org to fact check me. But I believe it kills the top and not the root system. So the plant gets knocked back, but is still able to come back. Other methods, you know, mechanical removal is pretty good because it gets the whole root system out of there. You just have to be really careful with the really large ones, you know, the kind that you pull out with your tractor, because if you leave roots in the ground, you can turn one bush into like 8 bushes. The method that seems to be the most effective as far as, especially if you have a really bad infestation, you're kind of in this area of the infestation of your property, is actually chemical control. It works really well because it goes right after the roots. Okay, let's see if I can remember the other questions. Remind me again, Lisa?
Yep, no worries. It was related to the removal of like mature invasives, like a Norway maple. Like when you take that out, should native plantings and ground cover invasive removal be done before cutting or after? And then if you're doing that cutting, what kind of erosion associated?
So I would recommend doing invasive removal whenever you have time. First off, I mean, the less you have on your property, the better. But if you were to like try to time that with like, let's say a timber sale, certainly I think if it was me, I would attempt to knock my population down right before opening up the canopy. if you can kind of make a level playing field for the invasive species and the native species to grow up together, essentially, you'll at least get native species that will overtop the invasive species. But I think anytime you can eliminate invasives on your property is the best time. And don't forget, you're not only affecting your property, you know, your neighbor's property is being affected as well. You know, a lot of these are spread by seed dispersal from birds. So if you're doing all that you can, and you know, every year going out and pulling your invasives, and your neighbor's not doing that, you're just going to have this continuous seed supply. It's a community issue, not just an individual property issue. So the less sort of seed source you can be putting into the world, the better, I would say. And as far as native plantings, yeah, that's a great. So if you, one of the issues, especially once you start getting into this time or this, you know, exponential growth of invasives, is that you have a seed bank. So if you have, you know, you treat your invasives and there's a bunch of seed in the soil and it just turns right, you know, starts growing again. But if you can treat the invasives or get rid of the invasives and then supplement that with a native planting, then you can give those natives a chance to potentially, you know, shade out the invasives. And every invasive is different too. That vtinvasives.org website that I keep talking about is really a fantastic resource. You know, like let me get, so honeysuckle is kind of moderately tolerant to intolerant, meaning that it doesn't do well in completely shaded conditions. So if you have a thick canopy, that species isn't going to do well in there. You can, if you have a good flush of native species mixed in with honeysuckle to the point where the canopy of the native species can close up, and then you can start to choke out some honeysuckle. That's not true for barberry. That's not true for buckthorn. They do just fine in the understory of forests. Multiflora rose needs even more sunlight than all of those. So I think just knowing what plants you have and knowing their tolerance and that sort of thing is really important when you're trying to get rid of them.
Great. Kyle, Peter Van Loon chimed in. He's done flame weeding before, so he can offer a little blip on that. So Peter, if you want to unmute yourself and share a little bit about your experience flame weeding, we'd love to hear about it.
Sure, thanks. Kyle's right, it is kind of fun. It's a little terrifying too, though, frankly. The first thing is, if you're going to do it, a day like today is a pretty great day to do it. I don't know what it's like at your house, but it's raining at my house and everything's really wet. And that's the first thing you got to make sure is that it's really wet. The way you kill the barberry is, with barberry, most of their dormant buds are right at the root crown, right where all those shoots go into the ground. And so if you superheat that, you kill all those buds and the plant won't resprout. It's unlike other plants that have a lot of those dormant buds along their roots. So if you don't pull up all the roots, you get those popping. But if you superheat that root crown, you'll kill it. But Kyle was right there. They're good at layering. So if a branch hits the ground, it starts another plant. So you have to be aware of that. You may kill the main plant, but if it's got branches off to the side in the ground, that'll keep going. And I guess the other thing I would say is that it's not a great system for treating a lot of invasive plants. It's, in my experience, barberry and winged euonymus or burning bush are about the only ones that will succumb to flame weeding. The rest of them just sort of laugh it off and come right back.
Great. Thanks for chiming in, Peter. Appreciate it. Okay, we got another one. We're staying on the invasive track. When should someone start stump treating honeysuckle and buckthorn? Do they need to wait until later, or can they do it now?
So I need to make it clear really quick that I don't have my chapter 10 in the invasive or in the chemical applicator. So I'm not allowed to answer specific chemical application questions like that by law. So my suggestion would be to go to vtinvasives.org again. and they have best treatment practices with that sort of thing. I do want to quick mention one more thing about barberry, as far as besides just taking over forests, they are very dangerous to human health. Ticks that, you know, I'm sure everyone is, I've already had a couple run-ins with them this year. They need a very moist environment to survive. That's why when you stick your clothes in the washer, it doesn't kill them, but when you stick it in the dryer, it does. And in a non, or kind of a native forest, those insects on the hottest, warmest part of the days are required to retreat into the leaf litter when it gets really dry and hot and sunny out. And that's a time that they don't get to search for a host. Barberry in particular does what's called transpirate really well, meaning it evaporates moisture out of its leaves. And so the ticks are able to stay on those plants, you know, all day long, even at the hottest points of the day. And that makes their success rate go way up. That on top of the fact that that kind of shrubby forest floor habitat that plant creates is really good for mice. And the start of the Lyme disease tract starts from mice and goes from mice to the ticks, and then from the ticks to us. And so they've shown out of a few studies out of Connecticut that the more barberry plants you have on your property, the higher the percent of ticks you have on your property. And not only that, but the percent of the ticks that you have on your property that are infected with Lyme disease is way higher too. So it's not only just a forest health issue, it's a human health issue as well.
Kyle, Ethan piped in, he does have that certification, so he can unmute and answer that question as well for treating, when to treat those and how with stump treating. So Ethan, if you want to chime in.
Yeah, hi, this is Ethan Tapper. I'm the Chittenden County Forester. So just as far as to answer that question, stump treating is effective. It's said to be most effective in the late summer and early fall. So for those of you who don't know, what we're talking about is this really cool targeted minimal application of herbicide where you cut the invasive plant and then you apply herbicide directly to the surface of the stump. That's called a cut stump application. It's really, really neat. It's a really, really interesting and accessible way to do it for most people. I use a tool called a buckthorn blaster. If you guys haven't seen it, it's really amazing. It's a modified bingo dauber, and you can buy it online. It costs $6. And it just is a little 4-ounce applicator that you can use to treat literally hundreds of plants using that cut stump application. Never gets on you, never spills. It's an amazing tool. But anyway, so it's said that the most effective time to treat invasives is late summer, early fall with that cut stump application. So that would be like August and September. It's also said that you can treat them pretty much any time of the year. And like Kyle said, if you have an invasive problem of any scale, you should really be working on it kind of all the time. And as a landowner, we know that time is limited and you don't necessarily have time at the exact right period of time to do that work. And so you can do it all winter, you can do it all summer, starting in June, and right about now is probably the only time when you don't want to do it. And the reason for that is because right now the plants are pushing stuff up from the root system, and they will just sort of push that herbicide off the surface of the stump. So I would say probably March through May, you would not want to do it. Any other time of the year, you could totally do a cut stump application of herbicide. And I think it's, you know, for a lot of these plants, it's the best way to actually kill them if they're at any scale on your property.
So like if I'm on my property, I should go out now and like put little flagging on the ones that are greening up after I identify them on VT invasives to make sure they're not native, and then go in later in the spring, later in the fall, or late summer. That's when I would do what you're suggesting, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, or really anytime starting in June, I would say.
Okay. Great.
I would say while you're there, try to pull it. And if it's too big, then flag it and come back.
Okay. Great. All right. I had another question. Someone asked a little bit about grapevine. They have a couple that are wrapping around trees and they wanted to chop them at the base and you know, how does that affect wildlife too? It's a wildlife food source, you know, so what are the thoughts about grapevine?
Yeah, well, if it's wrapping around the tree, it might not be grapevine. There is an invasive species called bittersweet that climbs trees by wrapping around them. But if it's, you know, kind of grapevine will have a bark that if you were to rub your hand up and down on it, it would be flying everywhere off of it. And they tend to have far-reaching grabbers all over the place. And yeah, it's a native. It's a native, and it certainly is a food, a source for food. But it also is a tree killer. So I would say it depends on your goals of your property, which I think is the base where you should start with any type of management you're doing. If you're interested in wildlife habitat and that's your main goal, I would let it be there. Let it be. And even if it kills trees, that's going to turn into a dead standing tree. We call that a snag, which is really good for wildlife habitat. However, if you're in the current use program or if you're interested in timber production, you don't want trees dying. So what I do with them is I cut them. I have a pretty big problem with them on my property here, and I just go with a pair of loppers and cut them. They certainly sprout back, and I like to do that work this time of year because, like I said before, the leaves are gone, so I can see them all. They're easy to find when they're kind of in the middle of shrubby things. And I like to cut them high. I've heard that they can reroot if they're too low to the ground. I certainly believe they layer, just like invasives. So you want to cut it high, and cutting it high also, you know, lets me see that it's been severed. So when I'm walking around looking for the next grapevine to cut, that it's been taken care of too. And the other thing to mention with those is they make it very unsafe for any kind of tree cutting that you're going to do. They tend to jump from crown to crown once they get up into the tops of the trees. And you go to cut one tree, and no matter how good you've done, you're trying to get to fell this way, it catches that vine and comes back. It's a very dangerous thing. So just from the perspective of safety, if you're doing management or harvesting firewood on your property, I would try to get rid of those as well. But certainly they're natives, and certainly they have their place in our environment.
And Kyle,
Yeah, they're a great late season food source. What? Go ahead, Kathleen. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
And what if it is bittersweet rather than grapevine?
Oh, get rid of that one as quick as you can.
Yeah. In the same way?
Yeah, no. So that's going to sprout back just as fast. And bittersweet not only can take over the crown and kind of choke out trees like grapevine can, but it, like I said, it wraps itself around the trunk of the tree. And as that tree grows into that vine, it essentially girdles it. And what I mean by that is, you know, trees do all their uptake through the middle in the center of the stem of nutrients and water, and then it goes into the leaves, and you know they make their energy and their sugar source from that, and then it travels down just underneath the bark, feeding the cambium layer, these kind of live green cells. If you were to kind of peel away at a bark, you'd see this green layer. That's the cambium layer. And so that stuff is feeding those. And if the tree starts growing into it and it blocks the tree's ability to send those nutrients down to its root system, the roots basically starve to death and the tree dies. So it's a much faster tree killer, and it is very prolific. Like we talked about, I mean, when it takes over a site, it's unbelievable. So I haven't had any success trying to pull those. I've attempted it. I think chemical treatment is probably the main method to use for that species.
Okay. So another question that's popped up is, how should we be managing our forests with the thought of climate change? Like, what should we be thinking about or doing in our forests with that in the backs of our mind?
So what I suggest and what I do on the ones that I'm managing is well, biodiversity, I think, and trying to build up resilience. So, you know, we have these models and we have these thoughts of how things are going to change, but nature tends to throw curveballs at us all the time. And so I think the best thing you can do is to have a healthy forest that is very diverse. A really good species mix. You certainly could do some plantings if you wanted to try to kind of move that forest into the direction we're probably headed. I would pay attention to moisture. I think is a big, at least in Rutland County, moisture, you know, how wet the soil is tends to be one of the main driving factors for what grows there. Like you go onto the south aspect of a hill, you're going to find like red oak and you know, hickory. So if you're on a southern aspect, and those are species that are going to do well in a warmer climate. So if you have a southern aspect, those are good ones to be thinking about. If you're on a northern aspect, you know, those are generally wetter. They don't get dried up as quick. That's usually where you'll find your sugar maple, your white ash, your basswood. And those are all species that they're predicting will move north. Won't favor as well with this warmer climate. Certainly, you could try to plant red oak on those. I don't think they'd be as successful as it would on the southern aspect. But yeah, I would say biodiversity. So having the best mix of species you can, so that site has the highest probability of being successful is what I would aim for if I was managing a forest with that in mind.
Great. So we have one other question, like back to invasives. Kathleen, we're gonna have to do an invasives workshop. What are the best tools for pulling like the bushy types of plants? The question was a weed wrench. Are there other tools if we're pulling those?
Yeah, weed wrenches are pretty good. If you don't know what that is, it's kind of like it's a tool with a pivot function that has a grabber. So and a really long stake so that you get kind of a mechanical advantage. They work great kind of for medium-sized invasives. When you get the real big 6 foot tall ones, they stop being as effective. And smaller than that, certainly I find it easier just to hand pull. But it's definitely a tool that can use to kind of up your ante as far as mechanical removals go. You just have to be extra careful with those too, because they, in my experience using them, they tend to be root rippers. And if you don't get all the roots out of the area, you're just exacerbating. You're just turning one bush into 8 bushes. But I think that the best thing is just this tool right here.
There was a question about can you borrow those from somewhere, and I do know that Elizabeth Spinney, the invasives coordinator, she does have some that you can check out of the Essex and the Rutland offices. There are some libraries like the Charlotte Library. You can take them out with your library cards. That's something you can think to institute with your own public library. I'm not aware of any others. I don't know if anybody else on the call is aware of others that you can borrow. No, okay.
I'm not either, but again, pulling is the trick. Cutting them doesn't help you. They sprout right back with a vengeance.
Yeah. Okay, great. Let's see, people are putting in there that, so everybody look in the chat box. So some people are putting ones in that there might be available to use. So if that's something you're looking for, then check the chat box. Again, type in any questions that you might have in the chat box. Kyle, I'm going to ask, if we weren't on this stay home, stay safe, what would you be doing right now?
I would probably be in a mix of actually being in my office, reviewing management plans. All the updates for the current use program just came in April 1st. So I would be doing a lot of that, but when I got crazy from doing that, I would probably be out on properties with landowners, either current use landowners, doing a walkthrough with them, or folks that just had questions or that just wanted to do a stewardship walkthrough. I would certainly be doing that. And I'm working with Corey, the new Bennington County Forester, on getting a timber sale out for the town of Bennington that I'm pretty excited about. Doing a lot of really cool work there. So that's what I would be doing if I wasn't stuck at home. But I do want to put a quick plug in. I started a YouTube channel. I attempted to upload my first video today unsuccessfully. So hopefully I'm going to have that up and running soon. And I'll share the link with Kathleen and Lisa so they can put it on their areas. And I'm gonna, once the buds on the invasives pop, I'm gonna be doing a video on identifying and polling those. So that's coming up for folks that are interested. I've got a video ready to post that just generally talks about the differences between aesthetics, wildlife habitat, and timber management, and another one that's almost done on white pine. So.
It sounds like you're even editing them. I'm impressed. This is all new learning for us. We tried to, we did a tree ID last night and tried to live feed it to Facebook, and that didn't work. We're going to try again. We got to figure out the problem, but we're still trying. We're all learning this new technology. It's fun to see everybody that's on the call. So any other questions that anybody wants to share? We have about 20 more minutes that we can have some conversations about forests and forest ecology. I guess I would love to know kind of, I mean, I know whenever I go out walking in the woods, there's like these things that just take me by surprise and I get really excited about. What really, like something that you've seen in the woods is just sort of like, this is really cool. I'm so glad I got to see this.
Oh man. Well, this time of year, it might happen tonight, actually. Once you get a warm night that's raining in the spring without snow or ice on standing bodies of water, the amphibians come out like crazy. I think it's the first rainstorm at night over 40 degrees with no snow on the ground is what triggers the mass migration. And I used to go to Paul Smith's College. It's where I got my bachelor's degree from. And there was a road there that kind of separated a pretty significant upland woodland habitat and a kind of wetland complex. And just the amount of, we went out there at night with headlamps on, and the amount of amphibians that were crossing that, where you could really see them on that road was just, it's stuck with me. It's an experience I'm hoping to bring my 5-year-old out to pretty soon here. It's just really cool to see. And, it's wood frogs, spotted salamanders, things you don't get to see on a regular basis are just like there in full force. So. Great,
thanks. We piped in a question about what problem is deer herbivory in Rutland County, in terms of regrowth, regeneration, and what are the strategies for dealing with that?
Oh, good. Really good question. It's a big problem in a lot of the, especially this county. So for those that don't know what that is, deer are browsers, not grazers, which means that they look kind of up and around from ground zero to about 6 feet in height, as opposed to like a cow, a grazer who looks down at the grass. And some of their favorite foods are buds that grow on the ends of the branches, especially this time of year, or the kind of the new growth of young trees. And they tend to love the stuff that we want to grow. So they love sugar maple, they love red oak, they love yellow birch. They tend to leave the invasives right alone. So there's another advantage for invasives. They don't like beech very much. They don't like black birch very much. And it's a challenge when you, do a timber sale where you have set up the light conditions to be ideal for a specific species, and it starts growing and you get excited. And then the next time you come, it's all eaten by a deer. It's a challenge. And the way I deal with that is I like to leave my tops high when I do a timber sale. And what I mean by that is when you cut the tree down, a lot of people or a lot of folks don't like the look of that because it's this big, giant, messy looking thing. So a lot of times they ask loggers to do what's called lop the tops. So they cut the top up so that it sits low to the ground instead of this big bushy thing. And I require them not to do that. You know, some loggers have a hard time with that because a lot of their timber sales are, you know, that's their calling card, that's their resume. And a lot of landowners that look at those areas with the big tops think that they're, it looks messy, and it does certainly look messy. But deer are kind of lazy. They don't like tramping through that stuff. And so it's a great way to protect your regeneration from deer browse. I have a slideshow, actually the slideshow I just tried to upload but didn't work. I've got this great picture of this timber sale where everything is eaten except for where the tops were left, there's sugar maple coming up under it. And remember that, you know, these trees are, you know, in this part of the world where our forests are adapted to respond to natural disturbances. And in this part of the world, that's wind events. So a natural opening created by nature where these trees would grow isn't a clean removed area. It's messy. You know, those trees don't go anywhere. It's all blown down. It's a big mess. So I'm sure there's microsite conditions that we don't even understand yet. So leaving your tops high are great. Plus they make fantastic wildlife habitat. The general rule of thumb is, you know, the messier the better. They make great places for mice and lower trophic level species to nest in. So that's been my main that's one of my main strategies. I guess the second one is to kind of try to go big. So if you can regenerate 40 acres of a forest, you have more of a chance of overwhelming the deer population than you do if you do, you know, 5 acres of a forest. And then the last strategy that I have is try to put them in my freezer during hunting season, which isn't as successful as I'd like always, but.
Yeah, that's always a nice piece.
Yeah, so I got one really quick. I put an email address in the chat just now. So the other thing I would like to do is if anyone has any other questions for me, they can email this email address. I have a state email address as well, but I'm trying to filter these through a different source. And if I get good questions, I'll try to make a YouTube video about them, assuming I can figure it out. So please, kids, adults, whatever, send questions and I'll try to answer them in a short video.
Awesome. That sounds really cool. I'm really excited about that. I'm gonna have to check that out when it happens. So one of the questions, you know, one of our partners, Audubon Vermont, has been talking about forests for the birds, foresters for the birds. What do we do if we want, you know, what does that mean? Does it mean I cut trees, I cut no trees? You know, what's the idea of managing your forest for birds?
Yeah, good one. Well, again, the first place to start is with your goals. So I think you can take an approach that's general bird habitat management, or you can pick a specific species. You know, if you're really into grouse and woodcock and chestnut-sided warblers, you want to be thinking about creating early successional wildlife habitat. And it wants to be at least 2 acres in size. And what I mean by that, that's a young forest. So you would, you know, a 2 acre section, you would essentially do a patch cut. And young forests like that are, by the way, the type of habitat that's in decline in the Northeast. So that type of work is really important. If you're into like, you know, more interior forest birds like the black-throated green warbler, the black-throated blue warbler, you know, they're more of a vertical structure type birds. So more of a mature forest with holes poked in it so that you have, you know, leaf and tree thickets in both the understory, the midstory, and the canopy. If you're into, let's say the scarlet tanager, which is a more mature forest bird and particularly likes oak stands, you want to try to maintain more of a thick canopy, and you're not so much worried about the midstory and understory. But there is, if you Google Vermont Birders Dozen, and you look for silviculture with birds in mind. There's all sorts of resources out there for the type of work you can do. And snag creation is really important. So those dead standing trees I talked about, species like the yellow-bellied sapsucker, and pileated woodpeckers really require those dead standing trees. And you can, the rule of thumb tends to be 4 an acre over 16 inches in diameter is the goal that you aim for with these. And you can create those by girdling a tree. So remember we talked about how bittersweet wraps around a tree and girdles, effectively girdles it. You can, if you cut into a tree just about an inch all the way around it, so that you just getting below that cambium layer, when that tree tries to feed its roots, the nutrients that comes through leaks onto the ground out of the tree, the roots die, and then you end up with a dead standing tree, which is fantastic for wildlife habitat. So there's all sorts of things that can be done with that.
Excellent.
Lisa, I'd also like to mention the Woods, Wildlife, and Warblers program.
Please do.
Yeah.
The website, vtwoodsandwildlife.org. For a couple of years, we've been doing visits with landowners, working with Audubon, working with Fish and Wildlife, Tree Farm Program, and doing visits with to landowners to do bird assessments and provide other services. Andrea has done some visits for us for landowners. Andrea's from Fish and Wildlife. So visit the website. You can sign up for any news. You can request a visit on your property as well. Now, granted, we're not doing that right now, but if you connect with that website, you'll be able to get some information going forward.
And I think if I was a beginner at this whole thing, my first step would be to Google, well, if you could get an expert out there, like Kathleen said, that's probably the very first step. But if you were, looking to do a little research on your own at home, I would Google Vermont Birders Dozen. I would probably look at YouTube maybe, and I would try to, their calls are, the 12 birds that Audubon has identified, their calls are very unique. And once you get them down, you start hearing them all over the place. And that's really, I think the thing to hang the hat on. It's hard to see them out there, but you can hear them for acres and acres.
Mm-hmm.
There's some fun noises. All right. Let's see, is there anything else? I was going to type in the Birders Dozen website. I haven't done that yet, but I'll get to it in just a minute. Yeah, so anything else you want to share? What sparks you right now?
Well, just finished sugaring. That was a bit of a spark for me. Like I said, I have a really small hobby operation, so I just have 22 trees I tap. So I made 6 gallons this year, which is kind of my max. So I've got syrup I bottled yesterday in my coffee, so that's pretty exciting. And gearing up to do some invasive work when that comes out, and excited about making some, I'm stuck here at my house. Luckily I've got a very small woodlot. I own 7 acres, so it's pretty small. But I'm excited about trying to make as many videos as I can here. Yeah, that's my life right now. Trying to homeschool the kids and get as much of this kind of stuff done as possible. Yeah.
So Kyle, you've done a program for us in the past on backyard sugaring.
Yeah.
For folks who have small parcels like you, is that something you could post or do as a webinar? Is this a good time to think about setting up your own backyard operation?
It's a good time to be planning. You can plan any time of year. We're at the end of the season, so it's not a time to be tapping now.
Right.
Unless maybe you're in the Northeast Kingdom. But yeah, I can certainly do that. This actually is a great time to plan because at the end of the season, people are going to be selling their equipment and be trying to upgrade. So it's a great time to to look for used small stuff, it's probably the best time once the season ends. So actually, it's probably a great time to be thinking about that. And I'd be happy to do a webinar on that or a video. We can definitely do that. I've got the PowerPoint ready to go. So.
Thank you.
Sounds good. All right. So there aren't any other questions. I do want to mention that last night we did a tree ID workshop or Zoom instruction that went over really well. We had 100 participants in there, and a lot that couldn't get in. I had a lot of emails this morning that I had to respond to. So in response to that, we added another tree ID program next Thursday at 10 a.m. That we'll be hosting. And we also will be posting the recording of that. Again, we're figuring that out as Kyle is figuring out YouTube, but it will get up there, so be patient with us. But the other tree ID actually is going to have a registration so that people will know that they can get in. I think we hope that works. So if you can find the link. If you don't have from our e-newses, it's in there. We've also sent it out to our partners. So if you haven't seen that, go ahead and shoot one of us an email and we'll send you that link. So I am, Kathleen, type in your email if you would, because I don't know it off the top of my head. I know it's K Warner, but or is it KM Warner? I always forget. So Kathleen will type that in and you can send either one of us an email and we can send that link to you to register. And if you have ideas for other programs you'd like to see on, we are all sitting at home and eager to connect and learn. So if there is something that you would like to see a program on, we'd love to help provide that for you. We're having a lot of fun. I'm having a lot of fun with this. And Kathleen is too. So we'd love to bring this to you as we can. Any other questions? You can unmute if you like to. Oh, lots of great jobs and thank you, Kyles.
Thank you so much.
All right, well, everybody have a wonderful day. And this weekend's supposed to turn out a little better than the last couple days. So, get out, get some deep breaths. That's really cleansing and helpful. I know that's been great for me. Get in some of that sunshine and stay safe and stay healthy.
And keep in mind that although Vermont state parks and state forests are, especially parks aren't, the facilities aren't open, like the bathrooms, they're open to the public. So that's a great place to go and get a little exercise and social distance yourself safely and get a little nature.
And this is actually a great time too, while you're out in the woods alone and spending a lot of time alone, to think about that land ethic that connects you to your forest and what it means for your stewardship. There's been a lot of work done around the state with different groups on developing Vermont's land ethic with landowners and organizations. And it's been a good time for me to think about Leopold's observe, participate, and reflect. Something I don't often do when I'm really immersed in the day-to-day business, but with a little bit of time right now, it's kind of nice to consider that. What connects us to the land?
And don't forget that 80% of the state is owned by folks like you. So it's you're the ones that are managing our Vermont forests. It's not the state, it's not the federal government, it's private landowners like you.
All right, well, everybody have a great day. Thank you so much. And we'll connect again. We're hoping to do this series like kind of every Friday featuring a different county forester. So I saw Corey was on the call. So Corey, you may just be next.
Yep. And Nancy Patch is in line too. I know she wants to do one.
Yep.
So that's great. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
So long. Would you like me to end the meeting?
Sure. We can chat later. We got to figure out to work on this